Imagine standing before a wall built more than 2,000 years ago. No cement, no modern machinery, no written blueprint, just enormous stones stacked together with astonishing precision. Now imagine that nobody knows exactly how it was built. Across the world there are places like this. Ancient structures so impressive, so unusual, and so difficult to explain that they continue to spark debate among archaeologists, historians, and engineers today. These are not stories about lost civilizations with magical powers. They are not tales of hidden technologies or forgotten superhumans. Instead, they are real places, places that still exist, places that researchers continue to study, and places that remind us how much of human history remains incomplete, because for every mystery that archaeology solves, another seems to emerge. A wall built from massive stones in ancient India. Cliffside tombs carved high above the landscape of Anatolia, a fortress standing at the edge of the Atlantic Ocean, a prehistoric monument aligned with the movements of the sun, and cities that appeared centuries earlier than historians once believed possible. Each of these sites offers clues, but none offers a complete answer. Together, they reveal something fascinating. The ancient world was often more sophisticated, more connected, and more inventive than we once imagined. Yet many of its greatest achievements remain difficult to fully understand. Tonight, we will travel across continents and thousands of years of history, from the mountains of Peru to the islands of Scotland, from Neolithic temples to Bronze Age cities, from forgotten fortresses to extraordinary tombs. And along the way, we will explore some of history's most intriguing mysteries, not to prove impossible theories, not to search for sensational answers, but to understand why these places continue to captivate researchers today. Because sometimes the most fascinating mystery is not what we do not know. It is realizing how much there still is left to discover. So, settle in, get comfortable, and let us begin with a remarkable structure hidden among the hills of ancient India. A wall built from stone so large that even today it raises questions about the people who created it. The Rajgir Cyclopean Walls, India's forgotten stone mystery, long before the rise of the Roman Empire, long before medieval castles appeared across Europe, a vast stone wall already stretched across the hills of eastern India. At first glance, it looks almost natural. The massive stones blend into the landscape so completely that many visitors pass by without realizing they are looking at one of the oldest surviving defensive systems in South Asia. But once you begin following the wall, its scale becomes impossible to ignore. The stones are enormous, some weigh several tons. They were carefully placed without mortar, and the wall extends for many kilometers across rugged terrain. Even today, archaeologists continue asking a simple question: how was this built? The structure is known as the Rajgir Cyclopean Wall. Located in the modern Indian state of Bihar, it surrounds the ancient city of Rajgara, once known as Rajagriha. For centuries, this city occupied an important position in northern India. It served as the capital of the ancient kingdom of Magadha, one of the most powerful political centers of early Indian history. Yet despite Rajgir's importance, the wall surrounding it remains surprisingly mysterious. The name Cyclopean comes from a term archaeologists use for structures built from extremely large stones. The word originally referred to ancient Greek beliefs that only mythical giants called Cyclopes could have moved such massive blocks. Today, the term simply describes a style of construction using huge unworked stones fitted together without mortar. The Rajgir Wall is one of the most impressive examples of this technique anywhere in Asia. Stretching across hills and valleys, the fortification follows the natural contours of the landscape. In some places, the stones reach several meters in height. In others, the wall appears almost hidden beneath vegetation and centuries of erosion. Researchers estimate that parts of the structure may date back more than 2,500 years, possibly even earlier. That alone makes it extraordinary. But age is only part of the mystery. The real puzzle lies in construction. Imagine standing in front of one of these stones. No cranes, no steel tools, no modern roads. Yet somehow ancient builders transported, positioned, and assembled thousands of massive blocks across difficult terrain. How? Archaeologists have proposed several explanations. The most widely accepted theory is surprisingly simple: ancient labor forces. large numbers of workers, careful planning, and enormous amounts of time. History provides many examples of societies moving large stones using sledges, rollers, ropes, and human coordination. The builders of Rajgir may have relied on similar methods, but even if this explanation is correct, it raises another question. Why invest such enormous effort? What made this wall important enough to justify such a massive undertaking? To answer that, we need to understand the world in which Rajgir existed. Ancient northern India was changing rapidly during the first millennium BCE. Kingdoms expanded, trade routes developed, political competition intensified. Cities grew larger and more complex. In this environment, defense became increasingly important. Rajgir occupied a strategic location surrounded by hills. The wall may have served as both protection and a visible symbol of power. Anyone approaching the city would immediately understand its significance. This was not a small settlement. This was a political center capable of organizing large-scale construction projects. Yet some aspects of the wall remain difficult to explain purely through military needs. Certain sections appear positioned in ways that do not maximize defensive advantages. Other stretches seem unusually extensive compared to the likely size of the population they protected. Because of this, some researchers suggest the wall may have served multiple purposes. Defense was likely one function, but it may also have marked territory, controlled movement, or expressed political authority. Ancient monuments often fulfilled several roles simultaneously. A wall could protect a city while also demonstrating wealth, organization, and prestige. In other words, the wall may have communicated a message, not only to enemies, but to allies, traders, visitors, and neighboring kingdoms. That message was simple: a powerful society existed here. One of the most fascinating aspects of Rajgir is its connection to early Indian religious history. Both Buddhism and Jainism have strong historical associations with the region. Ancient texts describe Rajagriha as an important center during the lifetime of the Buddha. Nearby hills contain caves, monasteries, and sacred sites linked to some of the earliest phases of these traditions. This creates an intriguing contrast. The same landscape that hosted philosophical and spiritual developments was also home to one of the region's largest fortification projects. It reminds us that ancient societies were complex. Religious ideas, political power, economic growth, and military concerns often existed side by side. As archaeological research continued through the 20th century, scholars attempted to better understand the chronology of the wall. Excavations revealed evidence of long-term occupation throughout the area. Pottery, tools, and architectural remains helped build a picture of life in ancient Rajgir. Yet many uncertainties remained. Dating large stone walls is notoriously difficult. Unlike organic materials, stone itself cannot easily reveal when it was placed. Researchers must rely on surrounding evidence, construction style, and associated artifacts. As a result, debates continue regarding exactly when different sections were built. Some scholars argue that portions may be older than currently assumed. Others suggest later repairs and modifications complicate the picture. This uncertainty is part of what keeps the site so interesting, not because the wall is impossible to understand, but because every answer seems to generate new questions. And perhaps that is the broader lesson of Rajgir. Ancient monuments often appear mysterious, not because they are beyond explanation. They appear mysterious because they survive only in fragments. The builders are gone, their records are lost. Their conversations disappeared thousands of years ago. What remains are stones, carefully placed stones that continue crossing the hills long after the society that built them changed forever. Today, visitors walking beside the Cyclopean wall often describe a strange feeling, not fear, not confusion, but perspective. The realization that human beings were organizing ambitious engineering projects long before most of the world we recognize today existed. The wall stands quietly beneath the Indian sun, weathered, ancient, partly understood, yet still impressive. And perhaps that is what makes it such a compelling historical mystery. Not that archaeologists know nothing about it, but that even after decades of research, the wall continues revealing how much there is left to learn about one of the oldest urban landscapes in South Asia. A reminder that history is not a completed story, it is an ongoing investigation. Alakahuyuk, the Bronze Age symbols. Nobody fully understands. Thousands of years before written history became common across much of the world, people were already building remarkable settlements. They raised walls, created metal objects of extraordinary craftsmanship, buried their leaders with carefully chosen possessions, and left behind symbols whose meanings remain uncertain even today. One of the most intriguing examples can be found in central Turkey. There, on a quiet stretch of land surrounded by rolling hills, lies the ancient site of Alakahuyuk. At first glance, it does not appear especially mysterious. Like many archaeological sites, it consists of ruins, foundations, and fragments of structures that have survived the passage of time. But beneath the surface lies a story that continues to fascinate researchers. Because Alakahuyuk has produced some of the most unusual artifacts ever discovered from the Bronze Age, objects so distinctive that archaeologists are still debating exactly what they represented and why they were created. To understand the mystery, we first need to travel back more than 4,000 years. The Bronze Age was a period of remarkable transformation. Across large parts of Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, societies were becoming increasingly complex. Trade networks expanded, cities grew, metalworking techniques improved dramatically, new forms of political organization emerged, and with these changes came new ways of expressing identity, power, and belief. Alakahuyuk was part of this world. Located in what is now Turkey, the site was occupied for thousands of years by different cultures and communities, but it is particularly famous for a series of elite burials dating to the 3rd millennium BCE. When archaeologists began excavating these tombs during the 20th century, they discovered something extraordinary. The graves contained an impressive collection of objects made from gold, silver, bronze, and other valuable materials. There were decorative items, weapons, jewelry, ceremonial objects, and among them were artifacts unlike anything researchers had expected to find. These became known as the Alakahuyuk standards. Even today, they remain some of the site's most recognizable discoveries. The standards are complex metal constructions featuring circular shapes, animals, geometric designs, and intricate arrangements of symbols. Some resemble sunbursts. Others feature deer, bulls, birds, or combinations of multiple forms. At first glance, they almost appear modern. Their designs feel sophisticated and carefully planned. The craftsmanship is extraordinary, yet despite decades of study, archaeologists cannot say with certainty exactly what these objects were used for. That uncertainty is where the mystery begins. Several theories have been proposed. One possibility is that the standards had religious significance. Ancient societies often used symbolic objects during ceremonies and rituals. The animal figures may have represented important beliefs, deities, or cosmological ideas. The circular elements could have symbolized celestial bodies such as the sun. This theory is supported by the fact that many of the standards were found in elite graves. Objects placed in burials often carried symbolic meaning connected to identity, status, or spiritual beliefs. But there is a challenge. Without written records explaining their purpose, interpretation becomes difficult. The symbols may have meant something very specific to the people who created them, something obvious to them, something completely lost to us. Another theory suggests the standards functioned as ceremonial emblems. Perhaps they were displayed during public gatherings or processions. Maybe they identified important families, leaders, or social groups. In many ancient cultures, symbolic objects helped communicate authority and legitimacy. The standards could have served a similar role. Yet once again, certainty remains elusive. The evidence allows possibilities, not definitive conclusions. And that is one reason Alakahuyuk continues attracting attention. The site demonstrates how much archaeology depends on interpretation. Researchers can recover artifacts, analyze materials, study construction techniques, but understanding meaning often proves far more challenging. A beautifully crafted object can survive for thousands of years. Its purpose may not. The standards are not the only mystery at Alakahuyuk. The burials themselves raise important questions. Many contained rich collections of grave goods. This suggests significant social differences within the community. Certain individuals appear to have received special treatment after death. Why? Were they political leaders? Religious figures? Members of powerful families? Archaeologists continue exploring these possibilities. The presence of valuable materials also reveals something important about Bronze Age society. These communities were not isolated. Far from it. Creating metal objects required access to raw materials, skilled craftspeople, and specialized knowledge. In many cases, resources traveled considerable distances before reaching their final destination. This means Alakahuyuk participated in wider networks of exchange and communication. People, ideas, technologies, and materials were moving across regions far more extensively than many once assumed. That realization has transformed how scholars view the ancient world. For a long time, early societies were often portrayed as relatively simple and disconnected. Modern archaeology paints a different picture. Communities separated by large distances frequently interacted through trade, migration, and cultural exchange. Alakahuyuk offers a glimpse into that interconnected world. One of the most impressive aspects of the site is its evidence of advanced metallurgy. Producing complex metal artifacts requires expertise. The craftspeople who created the standards understood heating, shaping, joining, and decorating metal with remarkable skill. This knowledge was not accidental. It represented generations of experimentation and learning. Imagine standing in a Bronze Age workshop, furnaces glowing, metalworkers carefully shaping materials using techniques passed down through experience. No textbooks, no formal engineering manuals. Only knowledge accumulated through observation and practice. The objects discovered at Alakahuyuk remind us that ancient artisans possessed impressive technical abilities, and yet technical achievement alone does not explain the standards. The question remains, why create them? Why invest so much effort in producing objects whose purpose is still difficult to define? Some researchers believe the answer may lie in symbolism. Human societies often devote enormous resources to objects that communicate values rather than practical functions. Flags, monuments, ceremonial regalia, religious artifacts. These things matter because they represent ideas, identity, belonging, authority, memory. Perhaps the standards served a similar role. If so, they tell us something profound about Bronze Age communities. They suggest people were expressing complex beliefs and social relationships through visual symbols. The challenge is that we no longer speak their symbolic language. Imagine finding a modern object thousands of years in the future. Without cultural context, even familiar symbols could become difficult to interpret. A national emblem, a corporate logo, a ceremonial uniform. Their meaning depends on shared knowledge. Once that knowledge disappears, interpretation becomes uncertain. The same may be true for Alakahuyuk. The people who created these objects likely understood them immediately. The symbols spoke clearly to their community. 4,000 years later, much of that conversation has vanished, yet traces remain, and archaeologists continue listening carefully. Excavations at the site have revealed additional layers of occupation spanning different historical periods. This long history adds another dimension to the mystery. Alakahuyuk was not simply a single settlement frozen in time. It evolved, changed, adapted. Different generations left their mark on the landscape. As a result, the site offers a rare opportunity to study long-term cultural development across centuries. Every discovery contributes another piece to the puzzle, not only about Alakahuyuk itself, but about the broader history of ancient Anatolia. Today, researchers continue using new technologies to investigate the site. Advanced imaging techniques, material analysis, comparative studies. Each method provides additional clues, yet the most important questions remain remarkably similar to those asked decades ago. Who created these extraordinary objects? What did they represent? And what can they tell us about a world that existed thousands of years before most recorded history? Perhaps that is why Alakahuyuk feels so compelling. The mystery is not built on dramatic claims or impossible theories. It emerges from something much more interesting. A collection of real artifacts, carefully crafted, beautifully preserved, and still not fully understood. They remind us that archaeology is not only about discovering objects, It is about reconstructing meaning, trying to understand how ancient people saw themselves and their place in the world. At Alakahotyuk, that effort continues, and every new discovery brings researchers a little closer to understanding one of the Bronze Age's most fascinating archaeological puzzles. The Broch of Gurnus, Scotland's circular stone mystery. On a windswept coastline in northern Scotland stands the remains of a structure unlike almost anything else in Europe. From a distance, it appears simple, a collection of stone ruins overlooking the sea. Low walls, ancient foundations, grass moving gently in the coastal wind. But as you approach, something unusual begins to emerge. The settlement is organized around a massive circular tower, a tower built nearly 2,000 years ago, a tower whose purpose researchers still debate today. This is the Broch of Gurnus, one of the best preserved examples of a mysterious architectural tradition that flourished in Iron Age Scotland before gradually disappearing from history. For archaeologists, broches represent one of the most fascinating puzzles of Northern Europe, not because they are impossible to understand, but because they raise important questions about how ancient communities lived, organized themselves, and adapted to their environment. To appreciate the mystery, we first need to understand where we are. The Broch of Gurnus is located on the island of Orkney, an archipelago situated off the northern coast of mainland Scotland. Today, Orkney is known for its dramatic landscapes, archaeological treasures, and deep historical significance. But thousands of years ago, it was already an important place. People had lived here since prehistoric times. They built settlements, farmed the land, raised animals, constructed monuments, and developed communities that survived in a challenging environment shaped by wind, sea, and changing weather. The Broch of Gurnus emerged during the Iron Age, a period that began in Scotland around the first millennium BCE. This was a time of gradual social and technological change. Iron tools became more common, settlements evolved, regional identities developed, and across northern Scotland, a distinctive type of architecture appeared, the brochane. At first glance, a broch resembles a circular stone tower. The walls are exceptionally thick. The interior forms a large central chamber. Passages, stairways, and hidden spaces are often built directly into the structure itself. Although most surviving examples are partially ruined today, some researchers believe many originally stood several stories tall. Imagine encountering such a building during the Iron Age. Across a landscape dominated by smaller structures, a massive stone tower would have been immediately impressive, visible from considerable distances, difficult to ignore, and perhaps intentionally designed to communicate something important. The Broch of Gurnus is especially valuable because it is not simply a tower, it is an entire settlement. Surrounding the central broch are numerous smaller buildings, pathways, and defensive features. Together, they provide archaeologists with an unusually detailed glimpse into ancient life. Excavations have revealed evidence of domestic activity, food preparation, craft production, and long-term occupation. People did not simply build this place. They lived here, raised families here, worked here, and spent generations shaping the landscape around them. Yet despite decades of research, one question continues to generate debate. Why were brochs built in the first place? The most obvious explanation is defense. The thick walls certainly suggest protection. The location offers excellent visibility over surrounding areas, and Iron Age communities sometimes face competition for resources and territory. A fortified structure would have provided security during uncertain times. This interpretation seems reasonable. But there is a complication. Some broches appear better suited for defense than others. Certain examples occupy highly strategic locations, others do not. In addition, the enormous effort required to construct these towers raises further questions. Building a broch demanded significant labor, planning, and resources. Communities would not have undertaken such projects lightly. As a result, many archaeologists believe defense alone may not explain their existence. Another possibility focuses on status. Perhaps broches functioned as symbols of wealth and authority. In many societies, monumental architecture serves social purposes beyond practical needs. Large buildings communicate power. They attract attention. They establish prestige. The broch may have served as the home of an influential family or local leadership group. If so, its impressive appearance would have reinforced social standing within the community. Visitors arriving at Gurnis would immediately recognize its importance. The tower itself would have conveyed a message. This was a place of significance. Yet even this explanation may not tell the whole story. Recent archaeological research increasingly suggests that ancient structures often fulfilled multiple functions simultaneously. A brooch could be defensive, symbolic, residential, and ceremonial at the same time. Human societies rarely organize themselves around a single purpose. Architecture reflects that complexity. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Broch of Gurnis is its relationship with the surrounding settlement. The tower occupies the center of a carefully arranged community. Buildings cluster around it. Pathways connect different areas. Defensive walls enclose the site. The entire layout appears intentional. This suggests a high degree of social organization. People were planning not only individual structures but the broader design of their settlement. That observation leads to another intriguing question. How connected were these communities? For many years, remote island societies were often portrayed as isolated from wider developments. Modern archaeology paints a different picture. Evidence from Orkney suggests extensive interaction with neighboring regions. Goods traveled, ideas spread, technologies were shared. The people who built the Broch of Gurnis were not cut off from the world around them. They participated in broader networks of communication and exchange. Archaeological discoveries support this view. Imported materials have been found at various sites throughout the islands. Certain artifacts reveal connections extending beyond local communities. These findings challenge older assumptions and highlight the sophistication of Iron Age society. The mystery therefore becomes more nuanced. The question is no longer simply why broches existed. It is how they fit into a wider cultural landscape. What role did they play in social relationships? How did they influence local identity? Why did this architectural tradition flourish so successfully for a period of time? And perhaps most intriguingly of all, why did it eventually disappear? This is one of the most compelling aspects of the Broch phenomenon. For several centuries, these towers were constructed across northern Scotland. Then gradually, the tradition declined. New forms of settlement emerged. Architectural priorities changed. The Broch era came to an end. Archaeologists continue investigating the reasons behind this transition. Several possibilities exist. Economic conditions may have shifted. Political structures may have evolved. Changing patterns of trade and interaction could have reduced the importance of Broch construction. Environmental factors may also have played a role. As often happens in archaeology, the answer was likely complex rather than singular. History rarely changes because of one event. Instead, multiple factors combine over time. The Broch of Gurnis offers an opportunity to observe that process in action. A successful architectural tradition emerged, spread, adapted, and eventually transformed. Yet despite all we have learned, many details remain uncertain. Exactly how tall was the tower? How many people lived within the settlement? What daily life looked like from season to season? Researchers can propose informed answers, but complete certainty remains impossible. And perhaps that uncertainty is what makes the site so captivating. Not because it is unknowable, but because it reminds us how much information disappears across centuries. Imagine standing on the coastline nearly 2,000 years ago, the sea stretching toward the horizon, smoke rising from hearth fires, voices carrying across the settlement, the Broch Tower dominating the landscape. To the people who lived here, none of it was mysterious. The purpose of the buildings was obvious. The social rules were understood. The meaning of the community was clear. Then time intervened. Generations passed. Structures collapsed. Memories faded. And what was once ordinary became archaeological evidence. Today, visitors walking through the ruins often experience a similar reaction. The site feels surprisingly familiar despite its age. The houses suggest daily routines. The pathways hint at movement and activity. The central tower still commands attention. You can almost imagine the settlement alive again. That sense of connection is one reason the Broch of Gurnis continues attracting researchers and visitors alike. It bridges a considerable gap in time. allowing us to glimpse a society that left no extensive written records yet clearly possessed remarkable skills and organizational abilities. The brooch remains standing, part monument, part mystery, part historical record, a silent reminder that some of the most fascinating questions in archaeology do not concern lost treasures or dramatic discoveries. They concern people, how they lived, how they built, and why they chose to shape the world around them in ways that still capture our attention thousands of years later. The Lycian rock tombs, the cities carved into the cliffs, high above the valleys of southwestern Turkey, entire facades emerge from the rock. At first glance, they look like temples, elegant columns, decorated entrances, carefully designed architectural details, yet something about them feels unusual. They are not standing on the ground. They are carved directly into sheer cliff faces. Some sit so high above the landscape that reaching them today requires careful climbing or modern pathways. Others appear almost impossible to access at all. For more than 2,000 years, these remarkable structures have watched silently over rivers, mountains, and ancient trade routes. They belong to a civilization known as the Lycians, and although archaeologists understand far more about this culture today than they once did, the rock tombs continue to raise fascinating questions about engineering, belief, and the relationship between architecture and the natural world. To understand why these tombs are so remarkable, we first need to understand the people who built them. Ancient Lycia occupied a region along the Mediterranean coast of what is now Turkey. Protected by mountains and connected to important maritime routes, the area developed a distinct cultural identity that lasted for centuries. The Lycians interacted with neighboring civilizations. They traded, adapted ideas, participated in larger political systems. Yet they also maintained traditions that were uniquely their own. Among the most striking of those traditions was the construction of monumental tombs. Across the region, Lycian builders created burial places unlike anything else in the ancient Mediterranean. Some were freestanding monuments, others resembled stone houses, but the most famous examples were carved directly into cliffs. Even today, visitors encountering these tombs for the first time often react with disbelief. The precision is extraordinary. Entire architectural facades emerge from solid rock. Columns, beams, doorways, and decorative elements were all carefully sculpted by hand. No separate blocks were assembled. The mountain itself became the building material. Imagine standing beneath one of these tombs during the ancient world. The structure towering overhead, the cliff rising above it, the surrounding landscape stretching into the distance. The visual effect would have been powerful, and perhaps that was precisely the intention. One of the most famous examples overlooks the modern town of Phedai. Known as the Tomb of Amyntas, it dominates the cliff face above the city. Its large columns and imposing entrance immediately attract attention. An inscription identifies the tomb as belonging to a man named Amyntas. Beyond that, however, many details remain uncertain. Who exactly was he? What role did he play within Lycian society? Why was such a prominent location chosen? These questions illustrate a broader challenge in archaeology. Monuments often survive. The lives of the individuals connected to them do not. The tomb remains. Its owner largely disappears into history. The location of the Lycian tombs has inspired considerable discussion among researchers. Why place burial chambers so high above the ground? Several explanations have been proposed. One possibility involves visibility. A tomb positioned high on a cliff could be seen from great distances. It would serve as a lasting symbol of status and remembrance. Anyone traveling through the area would notice it. The monument would become part of the landscape itself. Another theory relates to religious beliefs. Ancient societies often associated elevated locations with spiritual significance. Mountains, hills, and high places frequently played important roles in ritual traditions. Placing tombs above the landscape may have reflected ideas about the relationship between the living, the dead, and the natural world. Yet there is another practical question. How were these tombs carved in the first place? Even with modern tools, working on steep cliff faces presents challenges. Ancient builders accomplished the task using hand tools, planning, and considerable skill. Researchers believe construction likely began at the top and progressed downward. Scaffolding may have been used in some situations. Work crews would have carefully removed stone while maintaining structural stability. The process required patience and expertise. A mistake could damage months or years of labor. What makes the tombs especially interesting is their appearance. Many were deliberately designed to resemble wooden buildings. Stone beams imitate timber construction. Architectural details reproduce forms originally associated with wood. This observation has led archaeologists to an important conclusion. The tombs may preserve styles of architecture that no longer survive elsewhere. Wood decays, stone endures. As a result, these monuments may provide valuable evidence about ancient buildings that disappeared long ago. In a sense, the tombs function as architectural time capsules. They preserve details that might otherwise have vanished entirely. This connection between permanence and memory seems particularly appropriate. After all, tombs exist partly to preserve remembrance. The Lycian builders may have been using durable stone to recreate familiar forms associated with life, transforming everyday architecture into monuments intended to last for generations. As archaeological research expanded during the 20th century, scholars began examining the broader context surrounding the tombs. It became increasingly clear that these structures were not isolated creations. They formed part of a larger cultural landscape. Cities, roads, marketplaces, and public spaces connected communities throughout the region. The tombs reflected that society. They were expressions of wealth, identity, and social organization. The most elaborate examples likely belonged to influential individuals or families. Their construction required resources, skilled labor, careful planning, and access to valuable locations. Not everyone could commission such monuments. This suggests significant social differences within Lycian communities, yet the tombs also reveal something more universal: a desire to be remembered. Across cultures and throughout history, people have sought ways to leave lasting traces behind. The Lycian tombs represent one of the most dramatic examples of that impulse. Even after thousands of years, they continue attracting attention. Their creators succeeded in making an impression that survived far beyond their own lifetimes. Another fascinating aspect of the tombs is their interaction with the surrounding landscape. Unlike many monuments built separately from nature, these structures are inseparable from the cliffs that contain them. The mountain is not merely a backdrop, it is part of the architecture. This relationship creates a striking visual effect. The tombs appear simultaneously human-made and natural, integrated into the environment rather than imposed upon it. Modern architects and historians often admire this quality. It demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of place and design. The builders worked with the landscape rather than against it. Today, researchers continue studying the Lycian tombs using new methods and technologies. Digital mapping. Three-dimensional modeling. Detailed analysis of tool marks. Each approach provides additional information about construction techniques and historical development. Yet despite these advances, many questions remain. Certain tombs remain difficult to date precisely. The identities of numerous individuals buried within them are unknown. The full significance of specific symbols and decorative elements continues to be debated. These uncertainties do not diminish the importance of the site. If anything, they make it more compelling. The tombs occupy an intriguing position between knowledge and mystery. We understand much about them, yet not everything, and perhaps that balance is what makes them so memorable. Imagine a traveler approaching ancient Lycia more than 2,000 years ago. A winding road, mountain scenery, the Mediterranean climate. Then suddenly, high above the valley, architectural facades emerging from the cliffs. The sight would have been unforgettable. A powerful statement about the community that built them. Its values, its skills, its ambitions. Today, visitors often experience something similar, not because the tombs are hidden or inaccessible, but because they challenge expectations. We do not normally expect mountains to contain architecture. We do not expect cliffs to become monuments. Yet here they are, still overlooking the landscape after centuries of change. The kingdoms that once ruled the region have vanished. Trade routes shifted, cities evolved, empires rose and fell. But the tombs remain, silent witnesses to a civilization that found an extraordinary way to preserve memory in stone. And perhaps that is the most fascinating mystery of all, not simply how they were built, but how effectively they continue communicating across time, inviting modern observers to look upward and wonder about the people who transformed entire cliffs into monuments that still inspire curiosity today. The Treasury of Atreus, Greece's monument of impossible precision for centuries. Travelers approaching the ancient Greek landscape of Mycenae encountered a structure unlike anything they expected to find. It stood partially hidden within a hillside, quiet, massive, ancient even by ancient standards. From the outside, it appeared relatively simple, a stone entrance cut into the earth, a long passageway leading toward a dark opening. Yet beyond that entrance lay one of the greatest engineering achievements of the Bronze Age. A monument so carefully designed that it continues to impress architects, archaeologists, and engineers more than 3,000 years after its construction. Today it is known as the Treasury of Atreus, and despite decades of research, it remains one of the most fascinating architectural mysteries of the ancient world. The structure is located near Mycenae, one of the most important centers of Bronze Age Greece. Long before the rise of classical Athens or Sparta, Mycenae stood at the heart of a powerful civilization. Its rulers controlled trade networks, built fortified palaces, commissioned ambitious construction projects, and helped shape the cultural foundations of later Greek history. The Treasury of Atreus emerged during this remarkable period. Archaeologists generally date its construction to around the 13th century BCE. That means it was already ancient when many famous Greek philosophers lived centuries later. Yet despite its age, the monument remains astonishingly sophisticated. To understand why, imagine approaching it as an ancient visitor. The journey begins along a carefully constructed pathway known as a dromos. This passage stretches forward between high stone walls. The closer you move toward the entrance, the more imposing the structure becomes. Massive blocks of stone frame the doorway. Some weigh several tons. Their surfaces were shaped with impressive precision. And above the entrance sits one of the most remarkable architectural features of the entire monument, a triangular opening designed to reduce pressure on the doorway below. At first glance, it may seem like a simple detail. In reality, it reflects a sophisticated understanding of engineering principles. The builders understood that enormous weight from the surrounding structure needed to be managed carefully. The relieving triangle helped distribute that force. Without it, the entrance could have been vulnerable to collapse. The solution appears elegant even by modern standards, yet the true surprise waits inside. Passing through the doorway reveals a vast circular chamber rising high above the visitor. The space feels unexpectedly large. The ceiling curves upward in a smooth, dome-like shape. Stone rings gradually narrow as they ascend until they meet near the top. The effect is extraordinary. Many first-time visitors struggle to believe the structure was built more than 3,000 years ago. The chamber reaches approximately 14 meters in height. For centuries, it was among the largest enclosed spaces in the world. And unlike modern domes, it was built without concrete, steel reinforcement, or advanced machinery. Instead, the builders used a technique known as corbelling. Each layer of stone projects slightly inward beyond the layer beneath it. Gradually, the walls curve toward one another until the opening closes. The result creates the appearance of a true dome, even though the construction method differs significantly. This achievement raises an obvious question. How did Bronze Age builders accomplish such precision? The answer begins with planning. The structure could not have emerged through improvisation. Every stone needed to fit within a carefully calculated design. The dimensions had to remain consistent. The weight distribution had to be understood. Errors could compromise the entire project. Archaeologists believe the builders relied on generations of accumulated knowledge. Experience passed from one construction project to another. Techniques refined over time. The Treasury of Atreus was not an isolated achievement. It represented the culmination of an architectural tradition that had been developing for centuries. Yet even with that explanation, the monument remains impressive. The level of craftsmanship suggests highly organized labor and specialized expertise. People often imagine ancient societies as relatively simple. Sites like this challenge that assumption. The builders possessed advanced practical knowledge, not modern science in the contemporary sense, but deep understanding gained through observation, experimentation, and experience. Another fascinating aspect of the treasury of Atreus concerns its purpose. Despite its name, archaeologists do not believe it functioned as a treasury. The title emerged much later through historical speculation. Today, most researchers identify it as a thalos tomb, a monumental burial structure likely intended for elite individuals. This interpretation is supported by comparisons with similar monuments found throughout the region. Yet even here, uncertainties remain. No definitive evidence identifies exactly who was buried within the tomb. For generations, people associated the structure with legendary figures described in later Greek traditions. The name Atreus itself comes from mythology. According to ancient stories, Atreus belonged to a royal family connected with some of Greece's most famous legends. However, mythology and archaeology do not always align neatly. The actual identity of the tomb's original occupant remains unknown. This uncertainty contributes significantly to the site's enduring appeal. The monument survives. The person it honored has largely disappeared from history. Imagine investing enormous resources into creating one of the most impressive structures of the Bronze Age. Then imagine your name gradually fading over thousands of years. The contrast is striking. The architecture remains. The individual becomes a mystery. Researchers have also debated the symbolic significance of the tomb. Its scale clearly exceeds practical necessity. A smaller burial chamber could have fulfilled the same basic function. The decision to build something so monumental suggests additional motivations. Status likely played an important role. Large monuments communicate power. They demonstrate access to resources and labor. They create lasting impressions. In many societies, funerary architecture serves not only to honor the dead, but also to reinforce the authority of the living. The treasury of Atreus may have fulfilled both purposes simultaneously. The structure announced the importance of the individual buried within, while also reminding observers of the community capable of constructing it. This relationship between architecture and social identity appears repeatedly throughout human history. Monuments often reveal as much about societies as they do about individuals. The treasury of Atreus provides an excellent example. Its existence suggests political organization, economic resources, technical expertise, and cultural values that emphasized remembrance and prestige. The monument therefore tells multiple stories at once, not simply about death, but about society itself. Modern archaeological investigations have revealed additional details regarding construction techniques. The stone blocks were carefully shaped and fitted together with remarkable precision. Some surfaces were originally decorated. Parts of the structure may have incorporated valuable materials that no longer survive. These observations indicate that the monument likely appeared even more impressive when newly completed than it does today. Visitors entering the chamber during the Bronze Age would have encountered a carefully designed visual experience. Light, stone, scatter, proportion. Everything contributed to the overall effect. The builders understood how architecture could influence perception, and they used that understanding skillfully. Yet perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the treasury of Atreus is its longevity. Many structures from the Bronze Age have disappeared entirely. Wood decayed, walls collapsed, settlements vanished. This monument survived, partly because of its design, partly because of the durability of its materials, and partly because generations recognized its significance. Even as civilizations changed, the structure continued attracting attention. Ancient travelers visited it, historians described it, archaeologists studied it, and modern tourists continue exploring it today. Each generation encounters the same question: how was something this sophisticated built so long ago? The answer, in many ways, is both simple and profound: human ingenuity, organization, patience, skill. The qualities that allow societies to create extraordinary things. The treasury of Atreus does not require impossible explanations to inspire wonder. Its real history is already remarkable. Thousands of years ago, builders transformed stone into one of the ancient world's greatest architectural achievements. And although we still debate certain details surrounding its construction and use, the monument continues accomplishing what it was always meant to do. It captures attention. And it reminds us that the people of the Bronze Age were capable of accomplishments far more sophisticated than many once imagined. Standing inside its great chamber today, surrounded by stone shaped more than 3 millennia ago, it becomes clear why the treasury of Atreus remains one of archaeology's most enduring mysteries. Not because we know nothing about it, but because every answer reveals just how extraordinary its creators truly were. Sarazm, the ancient city that rewrote Central Asian history, in a broad valley near the mountains of modern-day Tajikistan lies a site that was never supposed to exist, at least not according to older historical theories. For much of the 20th century, many researchers believed that the earliest urban civilizations developed primarily in a handful of well-known regions: Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, ancient China. These areas were seen as the major centers where cities, complex societies, and large-scale trade networks first emerged. Then, archaeologists began uncovering evidence from a place called Sarazm, and suddenly, the story became far more complicated. Because buried beneath layers of earth was proof that an advanced settlement had flourished in Central Asia thousands of years ago, a settlement connected to distant regions, a settlement with skilled craftspeople, a settlement participating in networks of exchange that stretched across enormous distances, and perhaps most surprising of all, a settlement that challenged long-held assumptions about where complex societies developed and how they interacted with one another. Today, Sarazm stands as one of the most important archaeological discoveries in Central Asia. Yet despite decades of research, many aspects of the site continue to inspire questions, not because archaeologists lack evidence, but because every new discovery reveals a world more interconnected and sophisticated than previously imagined. To understand why Sarazm is so significant, we need to travel back more than 5,000 years. Around 3500 BCE, much of the ancient world was undergoing dramatic change. Agriculture had already transformed human life in many regions. Permanent settlements were becoming larger. Specialized crafts were emerging. Trade networks expanded steadily. Communities that had once existed largely in isolation began interacting with distant neighbors. It was during this period that Sarazm appeared. Located near fertile land and important travel routes, the settlement occupied a strategic position between different cultural regions. This location would prove crucial to its development. At first glance, the site may not seem particularly dramatic. There are no towering pyramids, no massive stone fortresses, no monumental temples dominating the landscape. Instead, Sarazm reveals its importance through something subtler: evidence of everyday life. Buildings, workshops, tools, artifacts, the accumulated traces of a thriving community. When archaeologists first began investigating the area, they quickly realized they had discovered something unusual. The settlement covered a large area. Its inhabitants engaged in diverse activities, and perhaps most importantly, many of the objects found there originated from distant locations. This immediately raised an important question: how did materials travel such vast distances during such an early period? The answer points toward one of Sarazm's greatest mysteries and achievements: connection. The ancient residents of Sarazm were not isolated villagers living at the edge of the known world. They participated in extensive networks linking multiple regions. Archaeologists have identified materials that appear to originate hundreds and sometimes even thousands of kilometers away. Semi-precious stones, metals, specialized goods. These discoveries suggest that people, ideas, and products moved across remarkable distances long before the rise of famous empires. Imagine standing in Sarazm 5,000 years ago, the surrounding mountains visible in the distance, merchants arriving from neighboring regions, craftspeople producing goods for exchange, conversations taking place between individuals carrying knowledge from different cultures. The settlement may have functioned as an important crossroads where diverse communities interacted. This possibility has transformed how historians think about early Central Asia. For many years, the region was often viewed primarily as a corridor through which later civilizations passed. Sarazm demonstrates that it was something much more: a center of activity in its own right, a place where innovation, trade, and cultural exchange flourished. One of the most fascinating aspects of the site involves metallurgy. Archaeological evidence suggests that residents possessed significant expertise in working with metals. This required technical knowledge, access to resources, and specialized skills developed over generations. Metalworking is not simply a matter of mating materials. It involves understanding temperatures, techniques, and material properties. The people of Sarazm clearly possessed such knowledge. Their achievements challenge outdated assumptions about the technological capabilities of ancient communities. Researchers have also discovered evidence of craft specialization. Not everyone appears to have performed the same tasks. Some individuals focused on producing specific goods, others likely engaged in agriculture, trade, or construction. This division of labor is often associated with increasingly complex societies. It reflects organization, cooperation, and social development. In other words, Sarazm was not merely a settlement. It was a community with structure, a place where people worked together to sustain and expand their society. The architecture of the site provides additional clues. Excavations have revealed multi-room buildings and carefully planned spaces. These structures suggest long-term occupation rather than temporary habitation. People invested significant effort into shaping their environment. They built for permanence, for stability, for future generations. And yet, despite all this evidence, important questions remain unanswered. One of the most intriguing concerns the nature of social organization within Sarazm. How was the community governed? Who made important decisions? Were there leaders with special authority? Or did power function differently than it did in later urban societies? The archaeological record offers hints but not definitive answers. This uncertainty is not unusual. Ancient settlements rarely leave complete records. Written documents are absent. Voices disappear. What remains are physical traces waiting to be interpreted. Another fascinating mystery involves the settlement's eventual decline. Like many ancient communities, Sarazm did not last forever. At some point, the site was abandoned. Why? Researchers have proposed several possibilities. Environmental changes may have affected local resources, trade routes could have shifted, economic conditions might have evolved. Population movements may have altered regional dynamics. Each theory contains elements of plausibility, yet no single explanation fully resolves the question. The disappearance of Sarazm serves as a reminder that even successful societies remain vulnerable to change. History is filled with communities that flourished for centuries before gradually transforming or fading away. The challenge for archaeologists is determining exactly how and why those transitions occurred. What makes Sarazm especially compelling is the broader impact of its discovery. The site did more than reveal a forgotten settlement. It encouraged historians to rethink larger narratives about civilization itself. For generations, historical models often emphasized a limited number of major centers from which complexity supposedly spread outward. Modern archaeology increasingly suggests a more interconnected reality. Different regions contributed in different ways. Innovation occurred in multiple locations. Cultural development was rarely confined to a single area. Sarazm fits perfectly within this emerging perspective. It demonstrates that Central Asia played an active role in ancient history, much earlier than previously recognized. The site also highlights the importance of trade in shaping human development. When people exchange goods, they often exchange ideas as well. Technologies spread. Techniques evolve. Cultural influences travel alongside physical objects. Sarazm appears to have benefited from precisely these kinds of interactions. Its residents occupied a position that allowed them to participate in a wider world. And the archaeological evidence reflects that reality. Today, researchers continue studying the site using increasingly sophisticated methods. Material analysis can reveal the origins of artifacts. Environmental studies help reconstruct ancient landscapes. Advanced excavation techniques provide new insights into settlement organization. With each discovery, the picture becomes clearer. Yet the sense of wonder remains. Because Sarazm represents something larger than a single archaeological site, it represents the hidden complexity of the ancient world, a reminder that history is often far richer than the simplified narratives found in textbooks. Imagine standing among the buildings of Sarazm during its height, people moving through streets, craftspeople at work, merchants arriving from distant regions, children growing up in a community connected to places they might never personally see. To them, this world was ordinary. Daily life, routine, reality. 5,000 years later, it feels extraordinary. Not because it was impossible, but because it survived long enough for us to rediscover it. The ancient city remained silent beneath the earth for millennia. Then archaeology brought its story back into view, and in doing so, it revealed one of the most important lessons in historical research. The past is rarely as simple as we imagine. Beneath familiar narratives often lie forgotten chapters waiting to be uncovered. Sarazm is one of those chapters. A place that challenged assumptions, expanded understanding, and continues reminding us that some of history's most fascinating mysteries are not hidden because they are unsolvable. They're hidden because we have only recently begun asking the right questions. The Skorba temples, the forgotten beginning of monument building. Long before the pyramids reached toward the Egyptian sky. Long before Stonehenge became one of the most famous prehistoric monuments in the world. Communities living on a small Mediterranean island were already building structures unlike anything around them. Their tools were simple. Their technology was limited compared to later civilizations, and yet they created stone monuments that would survive for thousands of years. Today, many visitors to Malta travel directly to the island's larger and more famous temple complexes. But hidden among the landscape lies a site that archaeologists consider just as important. Perhaps even more important in one particular way, because it helps answer a fundamental question. How did ordinary settlements evolve into societies capable of building monumental architecture? The site is called Skorba, and although it may appear modest compared to some of the world's more spectacular archaeological locations, its importance is difficult to overstate. Skorba provides a rare opportunity to observe one of the most significant transitions in human history. The moment when communities began transforming simple spaces into places designed for ceremony, gathering, and shared identity. In other words, it helps explain how monument building begins. To understand why Skorba matters, we first need to understand Malta itself. Located in the center of the Mediterranean Sea, the islands of Malta occupy a strategic position between Europe and North Africa. Today they are connected to the wider world through modern transportation and communication. Thousands of years ago, however, island life presented unique challenges. Communities needed to adapt to limited resources, develop local solutions, and create sustainable ways of living. Despite this challenged timelines, Malta became home to one of the most remarkable prehistoric cultures in Europe. The evidence survives in the form of stone temples. Massive structures built thousands of years before classical Greece or imperial Rome. For decades, archaeologists have studied these monuments in an effort to understand the people who created them. Skorba plays a crucial role in that investigation because it preserves evidence from multiple phases of development. Rather than revealing only the finished result, the site allows researchers to observe change over time. And that change tells a fascinating story. Imagine a small farming community living on Malta several thousand years ago. Daily life revolves around agriculture. Families maintain homes, store food, raise animals, and interact with neighboring settlements. The buildings are practical, designed to support everyday needs. At first, there is little reason to construct monumental architecture. Survival remains the priority. Yet over time, something begins to shift. Communities grow. Social relationships become more complex. Shared traditions develop. People start creating spaces that serve purposes beyond simple shelter. This transition is one of the most important developments visible at Skorba. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence suggesting that domestic structures gradually evolved into more formal, ceremonial spaces. The distinction may sound subtle. In reality, it represents a profound transformation. A house serves a family. A ceremonial structure serves a community. One addresses practical needs. The other expresses shared beliefs, identities, and traditions. At Skorba, researchers can trace this process through layers of archaeological evidence. And that evidence raises fascinating questions. What motivated these changes? Why did communities decide to invest increasing amounts of labor into constructing ceremonial spaces? What social or cultural developments encouraged such projects? The answers are not entirely clear, but archaeology provides important clues. One possibility involves cooperation. Large construction projects require people to work together toward common goals. Planning, organization, shared effort. The emergence of ceremonial architecture may therefore reflect growing social cohesion. Communities capable of building monuments are often communities capable of coordinating collective action. In this sense, the temples reveal not only architectural achievement but social development as well. The structures become evidence of relationships between people, evidence of trust, communication, and cooperation. Another possibility concerns identity. As communities grow larger, individuals often seek ways to reinforce shared connections. Monuments can serve that purpose. They create visible symbols of belonging, places where people gather, celebrate, remember, and participate in collective traditions. The temples of Malta may have fulfilled precisely these functions. Yet despite years of research, many details remain uncertain. This uncertainty forms part of the site's enduring mystery. Archaeologists can study walls, analyze artifacts, examine construction techniques, but understanding belief systems is often far more difficult. The people who built Skorba left no written explanations. No surviving documents describe their intentions. Their voices are absent. Only the physical evidence remains. And interpreting that evidence requires careful investigation. One of the most remarkable discoveries at Skorba involves the site's age. Certain layers date back thousands of years before many famous historical civilizations. This realization transforms scholarly understanding of prehistoric Europe. For a long time, early farming communities were often portrayed as relatively simple societies, focused primarily on survival. Sites like Skorba challenge that perspective. The people who lived here were not merely producing food. They were creating cultural traditions, organizing communal activities, and investing significant effort into architecture that carried symbolic meaning. This broader understanding has reshaped archaeological research across Europe. Increasingly, scholars recognize that prehistoric societies possessed levels of complexity that earlier generations sometimes underestimated. Skorba provides valuable evidence supporting that conclusion. The site's construction techniques also reveal impressive ingenuity. Builders worked primarily with local stone. Using available resources, they created structures capable of surviving for millennia. Their methods were practical but effective. The architecture reflects careful planning rather than random experimentation. Every wall, entrance, and arrangement of space tells part of a larger story. A story about people adapting creatively to their environment. One particularly interesting aspect of Skorba concerns continuity. The site remained important across multiple generations. Different communities modified and expanded existing structures. This suggests that certain locations carried lasting significance. Places acquired meaning over time, not because of natural features alone, but because of the experiences associated with them. Human memory became attached to the landscape, and architecture helped preserve that memory. This relationship between place and identity appears throughout human history. People often return repeatedly to meaningful locations. They build, rebuild, adapt, and reinterpret the spaces around them. Skorba offers an early example of that process, a location where generations contributed to an evolving cultural landscape. The site's artifacts provide additional insights. Archaeologists have recovered pottery, tools, figurines, and other objects associated with daily life and ceremonial activity. Each discovery contributes another piece to the puzzle. Together they reveal a community that was both practical and symbolic, concerned with survival, certainly, but also with meaning, with traditions, with shared experiences. And perhaps that combination explains why Skorba remains so compelling today. The mystery is not dramatic in the conventional sense. There are no lost treasures waiting to be found, no hidden chambers promising spectacular revelations. Instead, the site's fascination emerges from a deeper question. How do ordinary communities create extraordinary things? How does a group of farmers become a society capable of building monuments? How does daily life evolve into something larger? Skorba helps us explore those questions, not through legends or speculation, but through evidence preserved in stone. Modern archaeological techniques continue providing new information about the site. Radiocarbon dating, material analysis, landscape studies. Each method improves our understanding. Yet even as knowledge increases, the sense of wonder remains. Because the site represents a pivotal moment in human history, a moment when architecture began serving purposes beyond necessity. Imagine standing at Scorba thousands of years ago, workers carrying stone, families gathering nearby, ceremonies taking place within newly created spaces. To the people participating, these activities probably felt completely normal, part of life, part of community, part of tradition. They could not have known that their efforts would survive for millennia, or that future generations would study their buildings in an attempt to understand how monument building first emerged. Yet that is exactly what happened. Today, the stones of Scorba remain where they have stood for thousands of years, quiet, weathered, often overlooked compared to more famous sites, and yet they preserve one of archaeology's most important stories. The story of how communities transformed simple settlements into places of shared meaning. The story of how architecture became more than shelter, and the story of how some of humanity's earliest monuments began not with grand ambitions, but with ordinary people slowly reshaping the world around them. Bryn Celai Du, the monument that watches the sunrise on a quiet island off the coast of Wales, stands a monument older than many of history's most famous civilizations. It does not dominate the landscape with towering walls. It contains no vast chambers filled with treasure. And yet every year, for a brief moment, it performs something remarkable. As the summer solstice sunrise appears above the horizon, a beam of light enters the monument and travels deep into its inner passage. The effect is precise, deliberate, and difficult to ignore. For thousands of years, the Somchapters Tonson, the Meeble who designed it understood something important about the movement of the sky, something they considered significant enough to preserve in stone. The monument is known as Bryn Celai Du, and despite more than a century of archaeological investigation, it continues to raise fascinating questions about astronomy, belief, memory, and the relationship between ancient communities and the natural world. To understand why Bryn Celai Du is so intriguing, we first need to travel back nearly 5,000 years. During the Neolithic period, farming communities were spreading across much of Europe. People were settling permanently in new regions, clearing land, growing crops, raising animals, and creating increasingly complex social structures. This transformation changed human life dramatically. Communities that had once moved frequently now became closely connected to specific places. The landscape acquired new meaning. Fields represented labor and survival. Settlements represented identity. And certain locations became important for reasons that extended beyond everyday practical needs. Across Europe, this period witnessed the construction of monuments unlike anything that had existed before. Stone circles, passage tombs, ceremonial enclosures, large communal structures, each reflected changing relationships between people, land, and memory. Bryn Celai Du emerged within this broader context. Located on the island of Anglesey, the site originally began as a ceremonial enclosure. Archaeological evidence suggests that an earlier structure occupied the location before the monument we see today was constructed. This detail is important. It tells us the site already held significance before the famous passage tomb appeared. Generation after generation returned to the same place. They modified it, expanded it, and gradually transformed it into something new. That continuity is one of the first mysteries surrounding Bryn Celai Du. Why this location? What made it special? The truth is that archaeologists cannot answer with complete certainty. The landscape may have carried symbolic meaning. The site may have served as a gathering place. It may have been associated with ancestors, traditions, or important events. Whatever the reason, people clearly regarded it as significant enough to preserve across centuries. Eventually, the ceremonial enclosure gave way to the monument most visitors recognize today. A passage tomb, a carefully constructed chamber connected to the outside world by a narrow stone corridor. At first glance, the design appears relatively simple, yet closer examination reveals remarkable sophistication. The builders carefully selected stone, positioned structural elements with precision, and aligned the passage toward a specific point on the horizon. That alignment remains one of the most fascinating aspects of the site. Every year, around the summer solstice, sunlight enters the passage and illuminates the inner chamber. This phenomenon was not accidental. The precision required makes coincidence highly unlikely. The builders clearly intended the monument to interact with the rising sun. But why? That question continues to inspire debate. One possibility involves agriculture. For early farming communities, seasonal cycles were enormously important. The timing of planting and harvesting could determine survival. Understanding annual changes in daylight and weather offered practical advantages. A monument aligned with the solstice might have helped mark significant moments in the agricultural calendar. Yet many researchers believe the explanation extends beyond practical concerns. The effort required to construct Bryn Celai Dhu suggests deeper cultural significance. People invested considerable labor in creating the monument. They transported materials, organized construction, maintained the site, and returned to it repeatedly. Such commitments often reflect shared beliefs and social values. The solstice alignment may therefore have carried symbolic meaning, a way of connecting the community with recurring natural cycles. A reminder that time itself followed predictable patterns, the passage of seasons, the return of sunlight, the continuity of life. These ideas appear in many ancient cultures. Although the specific beliefs of the builders remain unknown, the monument suggests a profound awareness of the sky and its rhythms. What makes Bryn Celai Dhu especially interesting is the balance between mystery and evidence. Unlike some archaeological sites, researchers possess substantial information about its construction and development. Excavations have revealed details about earlier phases of activity. Artifacts provide clues regarding use and occupation. Scientific studies help establish chronology. Yet even with this evidence, important questions remain unanswered. We know how the monument was aligned. We do not know exactly what that alignment meant to its builders. We understand aspects of its construction. We cannot fully reconstruct the beliefs that inspired it. This distinction is important. Archaeology excels at revealing physical evidence. Understanding thoughts and intentions is often more difficult. The people who built Bryn Celai Dhu left no written explanations. No surviving records describe ceremonies performed at the site. Their worldview must be reconstructed indirectly, through architecture, artifacts, and patterns preserved in the archaeological record. One particularly fascinating feature discovered during excavations is a decorated stone associated with an earlier phase of the monument. The stone contains carved patterns whose meaning remains uncertain. Researchers have proposed various interpretations: artistic expression, symbolic communication, ceremonial significance, yet definitive answers remain elusive. This uncertainty reflects a broader challenge within prehistoric archaeology. Symbols often survive longer than explanations. The image remains, the meaning changes or disappears. Thousands of years later, we can observe the carving. Understanding exactly what it represented is far more difficult, and perhaps that challenge contributes to the site's enduring appeal. Bryn Celai Dhu encourages us to think about how people perceive the world. The builders clearly paid close attention to their environment. They observed the movement of the sun, recognized recurring patterns, and incorporated those observations into architecture. This combination of science, observation, and symbolism appears repeatedly throughout human history. Ancient societies were often skilled observers of natural phenomena. Their survival depended upon it. At the same time, those observations frequently became integrated into cultural traditions and beliefs. The result was architecture that functioned on multiple levels: practical, social, symbolic, astronomical. Bryn Celai Dhu appears to embody all of these dimensions. Modern technology has allowed researchers to study the site in greater detail than ever before. Digital mapping, astronomical modeling, landscape analysis. Each method contributes new insights. Yet, despite these advances, standing inside the monument remains the most powerful experience. The chamber feels intimate, the passage feels deliberate, and the connection with the surrounding landscape remains unmistakable. Visitors often describe a sense of calm rather than mystery, perhaps because the monument reflects something universal: human curiosity about time, about nature, about our place within larger cycles. Imagine arriving at Bryn Celai Dhu 5,000 years ago, the community gathering before dawn, the horizon gradually brightening, silence as the first light appears, then sunlight entering the passage exactly as expected. The event would have felt meaningful, not because it was unexpected, but because it happened reliably, year after year, generation after generation, the monument transformed an astronomical event into a shared experience, a moment connecting people, landscape, and time. Today, that connection still exists. The same sunrise, the same alignment, the same passage carved into the earth thousands of years ago. Much has changed since the monument was built. Languages disappeared, cultures evolved, entire civilizations rose and fell. Yet the sunlight continues arriving exactly where the builders intended, and perhaps that is the most remarkable mystery of Brine Chally Dudu. Not that we struggle to understand it completely, but that people living 5,000 years ago understood their world well enough to create something that still functions today. A monument not only of stone, but of observation, patience, and an enduring relationship between humanity and the sky above. Dunong Casa, the fortress at the edge of the world. On the western coast of Ireland, where powerful Atlantic waves crash endlessly against towering cliffs, stands one of Europe's most dramatic prehistoric monuments. The location feels almost unreal. Grass-covered stone walls stretch across the landscape. The ocean extends endlessly toward the horizon, and beyond the final defensive line lies a sheer drop to the sea hundreds of feet below. For modern visitors, the first question often arrives immediately. Why would anyone build a fortress here? It is a reasonable question. The site appears isolated, exposed to wind and weather, perched at the very edge of a cliff. Yet thousands of years ago, people invested enormous effort into constructing one of the most impressive prehistoric structures in Ireland. Today, the site is known as Dunong Casa, and despite more than a century of archaeological research, scholars continue debating one of its most important mysteries. Was it primarily a military stronghold, a ceremonial center, a symbol of territorial control, or perhaps something that combined several functions at once? The answers remain uncertain, but the journey toward understanding them reveals a fascinating story about architecture, community, and the relationship between people and place. To understand Dunong Casa, we first need to understand where it stands. The monument is located on Innis Mhor, the largest of the Aran Islands, off Ireland's western coast. Today, the island is known for its rugged beauty and rich cultural heritage. Thousands of years ago, however, life here required resilience. The landscape offered opportunities, but also challenges. Thin soils, strong winds, limited resources. Communities needed to adapt carefully to survive. Yet despite these difficulties, people settled the island and built impressive structures that remain visible today. Dunong Casa is the most famous among them. The fort occupies a position unlike almost any other prehistoric monument in Europe. Its builders chose a site directly beside immense sea cliffs. Standing near the edge today can be breathtaking. The Atlantic stretches outward without interruption. The sound of waves rises from far below. The horizon seems endless. It is difficult to imagine a more dramatic location, and that alone raises an intriguing question. Was the setting itself part of the monument's purpose? Archaeologists believe construction began during the Late Bronze Age or Early Iron Age, although the site was modified repeatedly over long periods. This means Dunong Casa did not emerge all at once. Generations contributed to its development. Walls were expanded, defensive features were added, the monument evolved over time. What visitors see today represents the result of centuries of activity. One of the site's most distinctive features is its series of concentric stone walls. These massive barriers surround the interior in multiple layers. The design creates an impression of strength and protection. Anyone approaching the fort would have encountered increasingly formidable obstacles. At first glance, this seems to support the idea that Dunong Casa functioned as a defensive structure. And indeed, many archaeologists believe defense played an important role. The walls are substantial. The entrances are controlled. The location offers excellent visibility across the surrounding landscape. From the fort, inhabitants could observe activity over considerable distances. These characteristics are consistent with defensive planning. Yet, there is a complication. The sea-facing side of the monument lacks walls entirely. Instead, the cliffs themselves form a natural boundary. This arrangement has inspired considerable debate. Some researchers argue that the cliffs provided sufficient protection, making additional fortifications unnecessary. Others suggest the monument's purpose may have extended beyond military concerns. After all, constructing such a site required enormous labor. People moved large quantities of stone. Organized work crews maintained the structure over generations. These efforts likely reflected more than simple security needs. One particularly fascinating feature is the area known as the Cheval de Frise. This consists of thousands of upright stones placed irregularly in front of parts of the fortification. The arrangement creates a difficult and confusing obstacle. Moving through it quickly would be challenging. The feature is often interpreted as a defensive measure designed to slow potential attackers. Yet even here, interpretation is not entirely straightforward. The stones may have served practical functions, but they also created a striking visual effect. Anyone approaching the fort would immediately recognize that this was a special place, a place marked by effort, planning, and intention. This observation leads to another possibility. Perhaps Dune Anhasa functioned partly as a symbol. Throughout history, monumental architecture has often served multiple purposes. Structures can provide protection while also communicating authority. They can defend territory while expressing identity. The fort may have announced the presence of a powerful community, a visible statement carved into the landscape itself. Imagine arriving on the island by sea thousands of years ago, the cliffs rising ahead, the fort visible above them. The impression would have been unforgettable. The monument communicated something important before a visitor ever entered its walls. This symbolic interpretation becomes even more interesting when we consider the broader prehistoric context. Many ancient communities invested significant resources into constructing monuments that reinforced social connections and cultural identity. Large structures often acted as gathering places, locations where people met, celebrated, exchanged goods, and participated in communal activities. Could Dune Anhasa have served a similar role? Some researchers believe it may have. Archaeological evidence suggests the site was not simply a military installation occupied by a small group of defenders. Instead, it may have functioned as an important center within the wider community, a place where social and ceremonial activities occurred alongside practical concerns. The challenge is that prehistoric societies rarely leave detailed written records. We can study architecture, analyze artifacts, examine environmental evidence. But reconstructing specific social practices remains difficult. This uncertainty contributes significantly to the site's enduring fascination. The monument provides clues, not complete answers. Another intriguing aspect of Dune Anhasa concerns its relationship with the natural environment. Modern architecture often seeks to dominate landscapes. The fort does something different. It works with the terrain. The cliffs become part of the design. The shape of the land influences the layout. Natural and human-made elements combine to create a unified whole. This integration suggests sophisticated planning. The builders understood the advantages offered by the location and incorporated them into the monument. The result feels remarkably harmonious despite its scale. In many ways, Dune Anhasa demonstrates how prehistoric communities interacted creatively with their surroundings. Rather than reshaping the landscape completely, they adapted their construction to existing features. The monument emerges from the environment rather than standing apart from it. Modern archaeological research continues providing new insights into the site. Excavations have revealed evidence of long-term occupation and modification. Scientific dating techniques help establish timelines. Landscape studies offer clues regarding visibility, movement, and resource use. Each discovery contributes another piece to the puzzle. Yet the central question remains surprisingly open. What was Dune Anhasa ultimately for? The answer may never fit neatly into a single category. Defense likely mattered. Symbolism likely mattered as well. Community gatherings, territorial identity, and social organization may all have played important roles. Human societies are complex. Their monuments often reflect that complexity. Perhaps the search for a single explanation oversimplifies the reality. Imagine standing within the fort during its height, people moving through the entrances, conversations carried by the wind, the ocean visible beyond the cliffs. To those who lived there, the site's purpose was probably obvious. No mystery existed. Everyone understood its significance. Then centuries passed. Communities changed. Traditions disappeared, and the meaning became harder to recover. Today, visitors often experience a powerful sense of place when they stand inside Dunan Hasa, not because of what archaeologists do not know, but because of what remains visible. The walls, the landscape, the scale of the achievement, the realization that people thousands of years ago selected this dramatic location and transformed it into something enduring. A monument that still commands attention, a monument that still inspires questions, and a monument that reminds us how closely ancient communities observed and responded to the world around them. At the edge of the Atlantic, where stone meets sea and history meets uncertainty, Dunan Hasa continues watching the horizon, part fortress, part gathering place, part symbol, and one of the most captivating archaeological mysteries in prehistoric Europe. Arbor Low, England's stone circle turned upside down. In the heart of the English countryside lies a monument that seems to challenge expectations. At first glance, visitors often assume something is missing. The stones are there, the circular layout is there, the earthworks surrounding the site are still visible. Yet unlike many famous prehistoric monuments, the stones do not stand proudly against the sky. Instead, they lie flat upon the ground, scattered across the interior of a great circular enclosure, as though time itself paused midway through a story and left the monument unfinished. This place is known as Arbor Low, often called the Stonehenge of the North. It is one of Britain's most important prehistoric sites. Yet despite its significance, it remains one of archaeology's most intriguing puzzles, because researchers continue asking a surprisingly simple question. Why was it built this way? The mystery is not merely about fallen stones. It concerns the purpose of the entire monument, its unusual design, its location, its relationship to the surrounding landscape, and what these choices reveal about the people who created it nearly 5,000 years ago. To understand Arbor Low, we first need to travel back to the Neolithic period. This was a time of profound transformation across Britain. Agriculture had spread throughout much of the region. Communities were becoming increasingly settled. The relationship between people and land was changing. Permanent fields replaced older patterns of movement. Villages became more established, and across the landscape, people began constructing monuments on a scale rarely seen before. Stone circles, burial chambers, ceremonial enclosures, long earthworks. The reasons varied from place to place, yet together they reflected a growing desire to shape the landscape in meaningful ways. Arbor Low emerged during this remarkable period of monument building. Located in what is now Derbyshire, the site occupies a prominent position within rolling upland countryside. The monument consists of a large circular earthwork enclosing an interior space filled with limestone blocks. A ditch surrounds the central area. Beyond the ditch rises a substantial bank. The entire structure forms a carefully planned enclosure. Nothing about it appears accidental. Every element suggests deliberate design. And that is where the mystery begins. Unlike Stonehenge, whose standing stones create an unmistakable visual presence, Arbor Low presents a different image. The stones lie recumbent, resting upon the ground. Some visitors naturally assume they must have fallen. After all, standing stones can collapse over time. Weathering occurs. Human activity alters landscapes. The explanation seems straightforward. Yet archaeological research suggests the situation may be more complicated. There is ongoing debate regarding whether the stones ever stood upright in the way people often imagine. Some scholars believe they probably did. Others argue that the monument may have functioned differently than traditional stone circles. The evidence does not provide a definitive answer. This uncertainty has contributed significantly to the site's enduring fascination. If the stones once stood, why were they later lowered? If they never stood, what purpose did they serve lying flat? Neither possibility is entirely easy to explain. The monument encourages researchers to think beyond familiar assumptions. One important clue comes from the surrounding earthworks. The ditch at Arbor Low lies inside the bank rather than outside it. This arrangement is unusual if defense were the primary goal. Defensive structures typically place obstacles on the exterior. At Arbor Low, however, The design appears to separate the interior from the outside world symbolically rather than militarily. Many archaeologists therefore classify the site as a henge, a type of prehistoric enclosure associated with ceremonial or social activities. This interpretation shifts attention toward different questions. If Arbor Low was not built for defense, what occurred within its boundaries? The answer remains uncertain. But archaeology provides several possibilities. The monument may have served as a gathering place for dispersed communities, a location where people met during important seasonal events, a space for ceremonies, social interaction, exchange, and shared traditions. Such functions appear consistent with evidence from other prehistoric monuments across Britain. Large communal structures often reflect cooperation between multiple groups. Their construction requires planning, labor, and collective effort. In this sense, the monument itself becomes evidence of social relationships. Building Arbor Low would have demanded significant coordination. People transported stones, excavated the ditch, constructed the bank, maintained the site over generations. These activities suggest a community capable of organizing large-scale projects. And that observation leads to another fascinating mystery. What motivated such effort? The answer likely involves more than practical necessity. Monuments often emerge because societies wish to express ideas, identity, memory, belonging, connection to place. Arbor Low may have fulfilled one or more of these roles. The challenge is determining which mattered most. One particularly interesting aspect of the site involves its location within the wider prehistoric landscape. Arbor Low does not exist in isolation. Other archaeological features surround it: burial mounds, ancient pathways, evidence of long-term human activity. This broader context suggests the monument formed part of a larger network of meaningful places. People moved through the landscape with purpose. Certain locations carried significance. Arbor Low appears to have been one of them. Researchers studying prehistoric Britain increasingly emphasize this perspective. Rather than viewing monuments individually, they examine relationships between sites, patterns of movement, visibility, connections with natural features. Through this approach, landscapes become active participants in human experience rather than passive backdrops. Arbor Low fits remarkably well within this framework. The monument occupies a location that encourages gathering and observation. Its position appears intentional. Its design reinforces separation between ordinary space and the enclosed interior. Crossing the bank and entering the center would likely have felt significant. A transition from one environment into another. Another mystery concerns the monument's chronology. Like many prehistoric sites, Arbor Low experienced multiple phases of use. Construction may have occurred over time rather than in a single event. Different generations likely interacted with the monument in different ways. Meanings evolve. Traditions change. What began with one purpose may eventually serve another. This possibility complicates interpretation. The monument we see today may represent centuries of adaptation rather than a single original vision. And perhaps that complexity is exactly what makes archaeology so fascinating. Ancient sites rarely offer simple stories. They accumulate layers of history. Each generation contributes something new. The final result reflects continuity and change simultaneously. Modern excavations have recovered artifacts that help illuminate aspects of life connected to the monument: stone tools, pottery fragments, evidence of human activity. Each discovery adds detail to the broader picture, yet none provides a complete explanation. The central questions remain. Why here? Why this design? Why these stones? The answers exist somewhere between evidence and interpretation, and perhaps they always will. Imagine arriving at Arbor Low 5,000 years ago. The earthworks newly completed, the stones carefully positioned, people gathering from surrounding areas. The event would have felt meaningful, not because of mystery, but because everyone involved understood the significance. The monument belonged to their world, their traditions, their community. They did not need explanations. The meaning was shared. Over time, however, that shared understanding disappeared. Languages changed. Cultures evolved. Memories faded. The physical structure survived while much of its context vanished. Today, visitors encounter the opposite situation. The monument remains. The meaning must be reconstructed. This reversal creates the sense of mystery we experience now. Yet perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Arbor Low is not what has been lost. It is what survives. Thousands of years after its construction, the monument still encourages curiosity, still inspires investigation, still draws people into the landscape. The stones may rest quietly upon the ground, but the questions surrounding them remain very much alive. Arbor Low reminds us that prehistoric communities were not merely surviving, they were imagining, planning, creating places designed to bring people together and shape shared experiences. Whether the stones once stood tall, or always lay as they do today, the monument succeeded in one important respect. It endured, and across 5 millennia, it continues inviting new generations to step inside its ancient circle and wonder about the people who first transformed an ordinary patch of land into one of Britain's most enduring archaeological mysteries. Sacsayhuaman, the stone puzzle above the clouds, high above the ancient city of Cusco. Enormous stones rise from the hillside. At first, visitors often focus on their size. Some blocks weigh tens of tons. Others are even larger. The sheer scale is impressive enough. But then another detail becomes impossible to ignore. The stones fit together with extraordinary precision. There is no mortar holding them in place, no visible cement binding them together. Yet the joints between many blocks are so exact that even today they continue attracting the attention of engineers, architects, and archaeologists. This is Sacsayhuaman, one of the most famous archaeological sites in South America, a place that has inspired admiration, investigation, and debate for centuries. And despite decades of research, it remains one of the most fascinating examples of ancient stone construction anywhere in the world. The mystery is not whether people built it. Archaeological evidence leaves little doubt that the structure emerged through the efforts of the Inca civilization and the communities that supported it. The real question is different. How did they achieve such remarkable precision? And why did they choose to build in this particular way? The answers reveal a story not only about engineering, but also about organization, landscape, and the extraordinary capabilities of a society that flourished high in the Andes Mountains. To understand Sacsayhuaman, we first need to understand Cusco. Located in modern Peru, Cusco served as the capital of the Inca Empire. At its height, the empire extended across vast regions of western South America. Road networks connected distant communities. Agricultural systems supported large populations. Administrative centers coordinated resources across enormous territories. The Inca world was highly organized and remarkably sophisticated. Sacsayhuaman occupied a prominent position overlooking this important city. From its elevated location, the structure commands extensive views of the surrounding landscape. Anyone approaching Cusco would have noticed it immediately. The site consists of massive terraced walls arranged in a zigzag pattern. These walls stretch across the hillside in dramatic fashion. Their appearance is both practical and visually striking, and it is the stones themselves that capture most attention. Some of the largest blocks weigh well over 100 tons. Transporting them would have required careful planning, coordination, and immense labor. Yet moving the stones was only part of the challenge. Shaping them with such precision presented another. Unlike many construction traditions that rely on uniform blocks, Sacsayhuaman features stones of irregular shape. Each piece fits together like part of an enormous puzzle. Corners interlock, edges align, surfaces meet with remarkable accuracy. The result creates walls that are both beautiful and structurally resilient. This observation has led many researchers to ask an important question. Why choose such a complex method? Creating irregular interlocking stones requires considerable effort. Using simpler shapes might have been faster. Yet the builders clearly preferred this approach. One explanation involves stability. The Andes region experiences seismic activity. Earthquakes have affected the area throughout history. Interlocking stone construction may have offered important advantages. The blocks can shift slightly during seismic events without causing catastrophic collapse. Instead of resisting movement completely, the structure accommodates it. This flexibility contributes to long-term durability. Many scholars view this as one reason the walls have survived so successfully. The engineering reflects careful adaptation to local environmental conditions. In other words, the builders were not simply creating impressive architecture. They were solving practical problems. This perspective highlights an important aspect of ancient engineering. Sophisticated solutions do not always require modern technology. They require observation, experimentation, and accumulated knowledge. The people who built Sacsayhuaman understood stone, they understood their environment, and they developed construction techniques suited to both. Another mystery concerns transportation. How were such enormous blocks moved across challenging terrain? The Inca did not use wheeled vehicles for large-scale construction, nor did they rely on draft animals comparable to horses or oxen. Yet they successfully transported massive stones from quarries to building sites. Researchers believe this was accomplished through coordinated labor, ramps, ropes, and carefully planned logistics. Historical accounts and archaeological evidence suggest large workforces played a crucial role. The process likely required patience rather than speed, planning rather than mechanical power, and cooperation on a remarkable scale. Imagine the organizational effort involved. Hundreds of workers, detailed coordination, specialized knowledge, long-term planning. Sacsayhuaman reminds us that monumental architecture often reflects social organization as much as engineering skill. A structure of this magnitude could only emerge within a society capable of mobilizing significant resources and labor. Yet despite all we know, certain aspects remain uncertain. Exactly how construction proceeded, how specific stones were shaped and positioned, how work was coordinated across different phases. Archaeologists continue investigating these questions. Each new study provides additional insights, but complete certainty remains elusive. This uncertainty is part of what keeps the site so fascinating. The monument is understandable in broad terms, yet still capable of surprising researchers with its complexity. The purpose of Sacsayhuaman has also generated discussion. For many years, the site was commonly described as a fortress. Its elevated position and substantial walls certainly support that interpretation. The structure appears defensive, and historical sources indicate military activity occurred there. However, modern researchers increasingly recognize that the site likely served multiple functions. Important monuments often do. The location may have possessed ceremonial significance as well. Its relationship to Cusco suggests connections with broader social, political, and symbolic systems. Some scholars argue that reducing Sacsayhuaman to a single purpose oversimplifies its role within Inca society. The monument may have functioned simultaneously as a defensive installation, a ceremonial center, and a symbol of imperial authority. This broader perspective reflects an important lesson in archaeology. Human societies rarely organize their most significant places around a single objective. Architecture often serves practical and symbolic purposes at the same time. Sacsayhuaman appears to exemplify that complexity. One particularly striking aspect of the site is its relationship with the surrounding landscape. The builders did not treat the hill as an obstacle, they incorporated it into the design. The monument follows natural contours, works with existing topography, and creates a sense of harmony between architecture and environment. This approach appears throughout Inca construction. Rather than imposing uniform designs regardless of location, builders frequently adapted structures to local conditions. The result feels integrated rather than imposed. Visitors often notice this quality immediately. The walls seem to belong to the landscape, as though stone and mountain were always connected. Modern archaeological methods continue expanding our understanding of Sacsayhuaman. Digital mapping reveals details invisible from ground level. Engineering studies analyze structural behavior. Material research examines quarrying techniques and stone selection. Each method contributes valuable information, yet standing before the walls remains the most powerful experience. Photographs rarely capture their true scale. The stones appear larger in person, the precision becomes more obvious, and the achievement feels more immediate. Imagine arriving here during the height of the Inca Empire. The city of Cusco below, the terraces stretching across the hillside, workers, officials, travelers, and residents moving through the surrounding landscape. The monument would have projected strength, organization, and permanence. a visible expression of what the society could accomplish. To the people who built it, the structure was not mysterious. Its purpose was understood. Its construction methods were familiar. Its significance was shared. Only later did the context begin to fade. Generations passed, political systems changed, historical memory became fragmented. The walls remained while many details disappeared. Today, Sacsayhuaman stands as both an archaeological treasure and a reminder of human ingenuity. Its stones continue inspiring curiosity, not because they require impossible explanations, but because they demonstrate what determined communities can achieve through knowledge, organization, and skill. The monument challenges assumptions about ancient technology. It encourages respect for traditional engineering, and it reminds us that some of history's greatest achievements emerged from careful observation and collective effort rather than advanced machinery. High above Cusco, the Great Walls still overlook the valley, weathered by centuries, tested by earthquakes, studied by generations of researchers, and still inviting visitors to ask the same question that has echoed for centuries. How did they build something this extraordinary? The answer, as archaeology increasingly reveals, is perhaps even more impressive than the mystery itself. What ancient mysteries really teach us. Throughout this journey, we have traveled across continents, cultures, and thousands of years of human history. We have stood beside massive stone walls in India, walked through Bronze Age tombs in Greece, looked up at tombs carved into cliffs in Turkey, explored ancient settlements in Central Asia, visited prehistoric monuments in Britain and Ireland, and climbed into the mountains above Cusco to examine one of the most remarkable engineering achievements of the ancient world. At first glance, these places seem completely unrelated. Different civilizations, different time periods, different languages, different landscapes. Yet beneath their differences lies a fascinating common thread. Each site presents a mystery, not necessarily because it is impossible to understand, but because it reveals how much of human history has been lost. And perhaps that realization is more important than any single archaeological discovery. When most people think about historical mysteries, they imagine hidden chambers, forgotten treasures, or dramatic revelations waiting to be uncovered. The reality is often very different. The greatest mystery is usually not what happened. It is how much everyday knowledge disappeared over time. Consider the people who built the Rajgir Cyclopean walls. To them, the construction process was ordinary. Workers understood their tools, builders understood their methods. Community leaders understood why the project mattered. Nothing about the wall was mysterious. It was part of their world. Then centuries passed, records vanished, memories faded, and future generations were left trying to reconstruct a story from stone alone. The same pattern appears again and again. At Alakahuyuk, beautifully crafted symbols survive. The precise meanings behind many of them do not. At Bryn Seladu, the monument remains. The beliefs associated with it are harder to recover. At Sacsayhuaman, the walls stand strong. Yet countless details about construction and organization remain subjects of research. In each case, physical evidence survives more effectively than cultural memory. Archaeology therefore becomes a process of translation. Researchers attempt to transform stones, artifacts, and landscapes into stories about people. Not perfect stories, not complete stories, but informed interpretations based on available evidence. This process requires patience, and perhaps more importantly, humility. One of the most significant changes in archaeology over the past century has been a growing recognition that ancient societies were often far more sophisticated than earlier generations assumed. For a long time, history was sometimes presented as a simple progression, primitive communities gradually becoming advanced civilizations. The reality appears much more complex. Again and again, archaeological discoveries challenge assumptions about what ancient people knew and what they were capable of accomplishing. The builders of the treasury of Atreus understood sophisticated architectural principles. The creators of Bryn Seladu carefully aligned a monument with celestial events. The engineers of Sacsayhuaman developed construction techniques capable of surviving earthquakes. The communities of Saras participated in extensive trade networks thousands of years ago. None of these achievements required modern technology. They required observation, experimentation, organization, and accumulated knowledge. These examples remind us that intelligence is not unique to any particular era. Human beings have always been capable of remarkable creativity. What changes are the tools available to express it? Another lesson emerges when we examine the landscape surrounding these sites. Modern people often think of nature and architecture as separate categories. Ancient builders frequently viewed them differently. At Dunan Hassa, cliffs became part of the monument. At the Lycian tombs, mountains became architecture. At Bryn Celli, the movement of the sun became part of the design. These communities did not simply build within landscapes, they built with them. This distinction is important. It reveals a way of thinking that emphasized relationships rather than separation. Natural features were not obstacles to overcome. They were elements to incorporate. The result was architecture deeply connected to place. Many archaeologists believe this relationship helped give monuments their lasting significance. The structures belonged to their environments, and their environments helped define their meaning. Another recurring theme involves memory. Nearly every site we have explored served in some way as a tool for preserving remembrance. Tombs preserved memory of individuals. Monuments preserved memory of communities. Ceremonial spaces preserved memory of traditions. Architecture became a form of communication across generations, a message from the past to the future. The remarkable thing is that, in many cases, the message partially succeeded. Thousands of years later, we are still paying attention. We may not fully understand everything the builders intended, but their creations continue attracting curiosity. They continue generating questions, and they continue encouraging research. In that sense, the monuments remain active participants in human history. Their stories are not finished. Every excavation, every survey, every new analytical technique contributes additional information. Sometimes discoveries answer old questions. More often, they create new ones. This may seem frustrating, but it is actually one of archaeology's greatest strengths. The field is not built around certainty. It is built around investigation. A good archaeologist rarely claims to know everything. Instead, they examine evidence carefully, compare possibilities, test interpretations, and remain open to revision. The mysteries we have explored tonight demonstrate why this approach matters. Many popular stories about ancient sites focus on extraordinary claims, hidden technologies, lost civilizations possessing impossible knowledge, explanations that appear dramatic but often lack evidence. The real history is usually more interesting, because it reveals what human communities actually achieved. Real people, working with available resources, creating structures and traditions capable of surviving millennia. That achievement requires no exaggeration. The evidence speaks for itself. Consider the broader picture. The world contains thousands of archaeological sites. Many remain partially excavated. Others have not yet been discovered. Countless stories still wait beneath forests, deserts, fields, mountains, and cities. Every generation gains new tools for exploring the past. Remote sensing technologies reveal hidden structures. Scientific analysis identifies the origins of materials. Digital mapping reconstructs ancient landscapes. Methods unavailable a few decades ago now provide extraordinary insights. As technology advances, our understanding continues to expand. Yet an important truth remains unchanged. The past can never be recovered completely. There will always be gaps, missing information, unanswered questions, and perhaps that is not a weakness. Perhaps it is part of what makes history so compelling. Complete certainty leaves little room for curiosity. Ancient mysteries encourage investigation. They invite us to ask questions, to examine evidence, to think critically, and to appreciate the complexity of human experience. Imagine standing beside any of the monuments we have explored: the Rajgir walls, the treasury of Atreus, the Skorba temples, Sakasewaman. To the people who built them, these places were not mysteries. They were familiar parts of daily life. People worked there, gathered there, remembered there, celebrated there. The mystery emerged only later, when time separated us from the knowledge that once surrounded them. That perspective changes how we view archaeology. The goal is not simply solving puzzles. It is reconnecting with human stories, understanding how people lived, how they organized communities, how they interpreted the world around them, and how they expressed those ideas through architecture, technology, and culture. The sites we have visited tonight differ in countless ways, yet they share one important characteristic. They remind us that human history is much larger than any single civilization, nation, or era. Across thousands of years, people have observed the sky, built monuments, created symbols, developed technologies, and left traces of their lives upon the landscape. Many of those traces survive, waiting to be studied, waiting to be understood, waiting to inspire the next generation of questions. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson hidden within these ancient mysteries. Not that the past is unknowable, but that it remains endlessly worth exploring. Because every stone, every monument, and every archaeological discovery offers the same quiet invitation. Look closer. There is always more to learn.